Hello everyone, Shinto Bean here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you one of the hobbies that I have enjoyed over the past few years, and that is creating my own card and board games. Now I'm not actually creative enough to come up with my own completely original ideas, but what I like to do is take a game, typically a video game that I have enjoyed, and convert it into a card or board game format. So I've just got a few examples here. I've actually made quite a few more games than this, but these are just some of the cards I've made. And so up at the top we got Stardew Valley. I made a little board game version of that. We've also got Kingdom Rush there in the top right. It's a tower defense game. And then I'm a pretty big fan of Blizzard games, so we've got Overwatch, StarCraft, and Heroes of the Storm. Made games for each of those. And then finally Warhammer 40k. I actually made a simplified board game version using these little square game tiles, and it plays out very similar to the tabletop game, except it's very much simplified, and anyone can really pick it up and play it easily without having any prior knowledge of Warhammer. So that was pretty fun. I did try it with a couple friends, and it was a good time. We were able to complete a game in about half an hour, and yeah. So more recently, I started collecting Age of Sigmar, and what started off as, I was just on the fence for a long time. I'm like, do I really want to get back into this, into the actual, collecting the miniatures and all that? But when I made the decision, I went all in, and now I ended up with 3 armies, and yeah, so a lot of time invested into that. I still haven't played that many games, but recently I've been thinking, I've been playing Warhammer Combat Cards for about 3 years now, and I'm a really big fan of the fantasy Age of Sigmar. There's a lot of really cool miniatures, a lot of cool models, so definitely a lot of potential to make that into or make a Warhammer Combat Cards game based on Age of Sigmar. So I decided to take things into my own hands, make my own physical version of the game. So that's what I'm going to show you here. So I've already come up with, I think, over 100 cards. So I'm just going to give you a preview of what the game looks like in my mind, and yeah, just show you how to play it. So here we got an example of a warlord and a bodyguard, and it's in essence pretty similar to a Warhammer Combat Cards, but obviously there are things that you can't convert over into a physical game from a digital game. So you have to make a few changes here and there. Yeah, so we'll just go through the card attributes here. So first of all, HP is obviously going to be a lot less on the physical game. So these cards tend to have pretty low HP. You can keep track of it with dice or damage counters. So yeah, Ikit Claw, the warlord there, only has 4 health. The little goblin shooter has 3. Defense is in the top right. You can think of it as armor or whatever. It's just how tough the card is. And then underneath the picture, we've got 3 more attributes which are about the card's attack characteristics. So we've got range. Now range, initially I was thinking of just having it determine the order in which the cards can attack, but I think that would make it pretty unbalanced, making ranged units a lot more powerful than melee potentially. So I decided to go with a little simpler version and instead just have range determine which lane the card can attack. So if it's a melee card with 1 range, it can only attack the card opposite. If it has 2 range, it can attack either the card opposite or an adjacent lane. And then 3 range, it can't target the card opposite, but it can instead target an adjacent lane or one that's 2 lanes away. So that's how range works. You can let me know what you think about that. Attacks. This is actually pretty similar to the tabletop game, so we're gonna do attacks using dice. Okay, so the number of attacks is the number of dice you'll be rolling for that card's attacks. And then we got strength, and this combat system is again taken from Warhammer. So you're comparing the strength of your card to the defense of the target of the enemy card. So like if you have equal strength and defense, then it takes a 4+ to deal the damage. If you have greater strength, then a 3+. If you have less strength, then it's a 5+, and etc. So I really do like that combat system that Warhammer created, so I like to use it in a lot of the games that I've made. Next up, we've got the tier of the card. Now this is up at the top next to the name of the card. So the tier, at the moment I only have 3 tiers, 1, 2, and 3, and that's just how many points it costs, and you take that into account when you're building your deck. So this Warlord, it costs 2 points, and the Goblin there, being a tier 1, you get only 1 point. And the tier 3, the 3-point cards tend to be quite a bit stronger. So pretty simplified, but yeah, so that's how that works. And then we got the traits, and a lot of these traits I just pulled straight from Warhammer Combat Cards, just obviously making changes for the physical card game. So like this Goblin here has the Endless trait. When it dies, it just comes back to play, in this case with full health. Now some of these traits might be slightly different depending on the card, just to sort of further balance it. In this version of the game, the Warlord does not actually have a trait, but instead has just a special rule, which is a unique ability to that Warlord, which will often have an impact on the bodyguards. It might influence all of your bodyguards, or it might target just a specific kind of bodyguard, like Ikeclaw here. In this case, he buffs your ranged units, so obviously when you're building a deck with him, you want to include lots of ranged units. Alright, so that's a rundown of what the cards look like. Now, how do we actually play the game? First, let's start with the components. What do you need? You need a deck of cards for each player, you need some dice, and then something to keep track of damage, some sort of damage counters, and maybe some tokens to keep track of certain effects like poison and stuff if you want. Now for the setup, here we've got the board set up. First of all, you have to agree on a points limit. I was thinking maybe like, what was I thinking? 12 points? 10 points? Something around then for the deck. Then you have to construct your deck, which consists of a Warlord and bodyguards. And then when you're setting up the table, you just put the Warlord off to the side in the command zone where it's visible. Obviously your opponent should be able to see the Warlord, know what they're up against. And then you shuffle the bodyguard deck. And I'm thinking for the initial deployment, you just draw 3 cards from the bodyguard deck, and then you have to deploy them face down, so you don't actually know what your opponent is up against. Now I thought about alternating deployment the way that Combat Cards has it, but that can be a little tricky because whoever deploys first is at a pretty severe disadvantage, I feel like. So I think just having the random, or rather the hidden deployment might make things a little more fair. Maybe what we could do is just have like 1 card have to deploy face up and the other 2 deploy face down. So that's another possibility. Still thinking about that. But yeah, so you deploy the bodyguards, then you reveal all the bodyguards, and then you can start the game. Now as for the actual gameplay, turn order. First you determine priority to see who goes first, and then when it's your turn, you get to choose the first card to make an attack. Of course, some of those traits activate at the beginning of the turn, so if there are any of those might occur before you make any attacks, or they might be triggered by attacks and whatnot, so pay attention to the traits. As for the attacks themselves, you choose the attacking card and the target. If it's a melee card, it can only target the opposite lane, but ranged units have more options. Then you roll the dice, the number of attacks, and then compare the strength and defense, as I mentioned earlier, assign any damage, and then your opponent will have a chance to activate one of their cards and make an attack. So it's alternating combat, kind of like, well, I've played Warcry. I don't really know about other games, maybe Kill Team, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think in this case, the alternating combat system I think would work pretty well. You can let me know what you think about that. And then you just repeat attacking back and forth with all cards. And if anything gets destroyed, you remove that from the table and then you replace it with another card from your deck. Now I'm thinking you can maybe do something similar to Combat Cards here and just draw 3 cards and then choose one that you want to deploy in that lane. Now in Warhammer Combat Cards, when you're deploying cards, you can actually shift your cards over whenever you deploy them. but I feel like that might make things a little bit complicated for this. I mean, it's possible, but for now I'm thinking just replace the card in the lane that it was destroyed. And yeah, you do have 3 options, so you can just choose the best one. And again, because you have cards that can target multiple lanes, there is more, I think, flexibility there. So yeah, that's what happens when the card dies, and then you continue doing that, and then when all your bodyguards are gone, then your warlord has to come to the field. In combat cards, it has to go to the center lane. I don't know if it necessarily has to do that in this game. Once the warlord is on the field, whoever is the first to kill the enemy warlord is the winner of the game. So yeah, that's how the game works. The only thing I missed there was the end of turn effects. Again, some of the traits, some of the special rules of the warlords also trigger at the end of turns. In terms of the turns, the only thing that, because you have alternating attack, both players are, making attacks on both players' turn. The only thing that the turn does is determine priority, so who gets to choose the first card to attack. So you do want to go back and forth there. So yeah, that is what this game is looking like. Like I said, I've already designed quite a few cards. In this case here, I've got Skaven against Sylvaneth, but yeah, I've got like 7 factions so far, but AOS has a whole lot of factions, so many different options, and I really had a lot of fun creating all these cards. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to show you each faction in detail. The warlords and the bodyguards, and just how all the cards work. So let me know what you think, if you think this is a good idea, if you're interested. If you have any comments or criticism, I'd be happy to hear them. But yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.